Consciousness is not on or off. It has a number, a real number, a quantity you could write down. Science calls it Phi. The symbol is a circle with a line through it. Phi. Hold that shape in your mind. Everything in this video bends around it. That number is not only inside your skull, the phone in your hand has one, the chair under you has one, the wall behind you has one. They are small, almost nothing, but almost nothing is not zero. And a theory taken seriously by serious scientists says yours is just a larger version of the same thing. You know what it feels like to be you. The taste of coffee going cold, the weight of an old memory, the particular silence of your own room at night. That feeling is not vague. It has structure, it has edges, and one theory claims that structure can be measured. Not described, not guessed at, measured. Think about what that means for a second. The redness of red, the ache of grief, the feeling of your own name. These have always seemed beyond any ruler, beyond any scale. The one thing in the universe a machine could never reach. You have always assumed your inner life was private, unreachable, a thing no instrument could ever touch. Stay with me, because a man built the instrument anyway. Science has a problem with consciousness. It is the deepest problem science has. Philosophers gave it a name, the hard problem. The easy problems are not easy. They are merely solvable. How does the eye process light? How does the brain store a face? How does a decision move a hand? These are circuits. We are mapping them. Slowly, but we are mapping them. The hard problem is different. Why is any of it felt? Why is there something it is like to be you? A camera processes light and feels nothing. A thermostat reacts and feels nothing. Your brain processes light and a world appears. Color, pain, the blue of the sky. Where does the feeling come from? You cannot answer that by pointing at neurons. Neurons fire in a corpse for minutes after death. Firing is not feeling. So saying neurons fire, therefore consciousness, explains nothing. It just renames the mystery. The field splits into camps over this. Some say consciousness is quantum, that it hides in tiny structures inside your neurons, below the level of ordinary biology. We covered that theory last time. Your brain is an antenna. It is on the channel now. Others say consciousness is a broadcast, that your brain becomes aware of something only when it shouts that something across itself. We will cover that next. But one theory says something stranger than both. It does not look for consciousness in particles. It does not look for it in broadcasts. It says consciousness is not a substance at all. It says consciousness is a shape made of information, and shapes can be measured. A neuroscientist named Giulio Tononi asked a question no one else was asking. Not, where is consciousness? Everyone asked that. Tononi asked, how much? How much consciousness is in a sleeping brain? In a fly? How much in a machine? He treated consciousness like a temperature, something with a value, something you could read off a scale. The theory he built is called Integrated Information Theory, IIT. Tononi is no mystic. He speaks in equations. He does not soften the strange parts, and he does not care whether you believe him. He follows the math to wherever it goes. As you will see, it goes somewhere you will not like. He did not start with the brain. That is the strange part. He started with experience itself, with the raw fact of what it is like to be conscious right now. He pulled out the things that are true of every experience, without exception. He called them axioms, truths so basic you cannot doubt them from the inside. The first is the hardest to argue with. Your experience exists. For you, it is the one thing more certain than anything else. You could be wrong about the world. You cannot be wrong that you are experiencing. The second, every experience has structure. Right now you see shapes and colors and depth all at once bound together. Your experience is composed of parts. The third, every experience is specific. This room and not another, this moment and not all moments. Each experience rules out countless others it could have been. It carries information by being exactly this. The fourth is the heart of the theory. Every experience is unified. You do not see the left half of this scene separately from the right. You do not hear sound in one mind and see color in another. You cannot hand half your visual field to someone else and keep the rest. It comes to you as one, whole, irreducible. The theory calls this integration. Hold on to that word. Cut a unified mind apart, and you destroy something that cannot be put back together. That lost something has a size. That size is Phi. The fifth, every experience has a border. It is this much and no more. It excludes what lies outside it. It has a grain, a definite edge in space and time. Hold those five: existence, structure, specificity, integration, borders. Tononi did something audacious with them. He turned them into a measurement. Here is the core idea, and it is simpler than it sounds. A conscious system is one that is more than the sum of its parts. Not as a slogan, as arithmetic. Take any system, your brain, a circuit, a network. Now cut it. Split it down the middle into pieces. Ask one question. How much information did you destroy by cutting? If the pieces work just as well apart as together, you destroyed nothing. The whole was only ever a pile of parts. Its Phi is zero. It is, in the language of the theory, not conscious at all. But if cutting the system shatters something, if the whole was holding information that no part could hold alone, then you cannot reduce it without loss. That irreducible surplus has a size. That size is Phi. Phi measures how much a system exists as a whole, above and beyond its pieces. A high Phi means a tightly woven thing, where every part shapes every other, where the connections matter as much as the components. A low Phi means a loose crowd, many parts, little unity. Your brain is the most integrated object we have ever found. 86 billion neurons, each wired to thousands of others. Cut it anywhere and you lose something enormous. That, the theory says, is why it feels like so much to be you. Your Phi is high. A digital camera has more sensors than your retina, millions of them. But each pixel sits alone. They do not talk. Cut the sensor in half, and each half works exactly as before. Nothing is lost. The Phi of the camera is near zero. It records the sunset. It does not see it. That is the whole engine of the theory. Consciousness is not what a system does. It is how deeply a system is woven into itself, and weave can be counted. A theory that only talks is philosophy. Tononi wanted a theory that could be tested. So his collaborators built a device. They built, in effect, a consciousness meter. This is the opposite of the quantum approach. The theory we covered in Your Brain is an Antenna looks down into structures inside a single neuron. This one looks across the whole brain at once. Same question, opposite direction. A physician named Marcello Massimini, working in Tononi's orbit, made it real. The method is brutal and elegant. You take a magnetic coil, you hold it to the skull. You fire a sharp pulse into the brain, a knock. Then you listen to the echo with electrodes across the whole head. A conscious brain answers the knock with a symphony. The signal spreads, complex, intricate, different everywhere, weaving across regions. An unconscious brain answers with a thud, a simple wave that dies where it started. or a dull repeat that says nothing. They compress the echo and measure its complexity. They turned that number into an index, the Perturbational Complexity Index, PCI, a single value for how richly a brain responds to being touched. Then they tested it against the one thing we already know. They measured people awake, asleep, under anesthesia, in coma, and the numbers lined up exactly where they should. Awake brains scored high. Dreamless sleep scored low. Anesthesia, lower still. The meter agreed with reality. This is not a thought experiment. Doctors are using versions of this today to probe patients who cannot move, cannot speak, cannot signal. Patients trapped behind a still face. Some of them are diagnosed as vegetative, gone, a body kept alive around an empty room. But the meter sometimes disagrees. It fires the pulse, listens to the echo, and finds the rich, woven signal of a waking mind. A high number. A person, fully aware, locked inside a body that cannot lift a finger to prove it. The meter can find a mind still burning where every other test sees nothing. Read that again. A machine, looking for someone home, in a body that cannot answer. Now the twist, the one that does not let go of you. If Phi is real, the meter does not care what it is measuring. It does not check for a brain. It does not check for biology. It checks for integration, for information woven into a whole. And integration is everywhere. The phone in your hand integrates a little. Its Phi is tiny, but follow the logic, and it is not nothing. A bee's brain integrates more. 1 million neurons, densely wired, navigating a world. Its Phi is real and not small. A human brain sits at the top of everything we have ever measured. And the universe itself, vast and woven and old. That one stays an open question. Nobody can rule it out. But the theory does not stop at brains. It cannot stop. The rule is the rule. Anything woven tightly enough, in the right shape, has some Phi. And Phi is what consciousness is made of. Scientists have a name for where this leads. Panpsychism. The ancient idea that mind is not rare in the universe, that it is woven into the fabric of things, in degrees, everywhere there is integration. The theory did not set out to prove that. It was dragged there, by its own math. Tononi did not carry this alone. A second figure stood beside him. Christoph Koch, a neuroscientist who spent decades hunting the physical signature of consciousness in the brain. Koch became the theory's loudest voice, its evangelist. He pushed it into laboratories and onto stages and into the public eye. In 1998, in a smoky bar in Germany, Koch made a bet. He bet a philosopher named David Chalmers a case of fine wine. Within 25 years, he said, science would find a clear signature of consciousness in the brain. A definite mark, a place you could point to and say, there it is. 25 years later, in 2023, he paid up. Koch handed Chalmers the wine and conceded. The clear signature had not arrived. The man who spent his life chasing consciousness admitted, in public, that it had slipped the net again. And in that same year, the field decided to stop guessing and run the experiment that would expose them all. For years, this stayed a quarrel among specialists. Then, in 2023, the field did something almost unheard of in science. It put two rival theories into a ring and forced them to fight. Two theories of consciousness had ruled for decades. Tononi's IIT, which says consciousness lives in the dense integration of the back of the brain, and a rival, the Global Workspace Theory, which says consciousness is a broadcast from the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, when information is shouted across the mind. They predict different things. They point at different brain regions. For 20 years, they argued in papers, never touching. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate, had a name for the fix: adversarial collaboration. Put the rivals in the same room. Make them agree in advance on the experiments that could prove them wrong. That is what happened. A large consortium of labs ran one set of experiments. Same subjects, same scans, same data, designed by both camps together. Each theory was forced to commit to its predictions before the results came in. No hiding afterward, no moving the goalposts. The work was unveiled in 2023 and published in the journal Nature in 2025. Here is what they left out of the headlines. Neither theory won. IIT predicted that conscious experience would show up as sustained, synchronized activity in the back of the brain. Some of that held. Much of it did not. The sustained synchrony it required was not clearly there. The workspace theory predicted a sharp burst of activity in the front of the brain, a flare marking awareness. Some conscious information did appear up front, but the flare it predicted, especially at the moment an experience ended, did not arrive as promised. Two grand theories, both bruised, both left explaining what they missed. That sounds like failure. It is the opposite. For the first time, the hard problem behaved like a normal scientific problem. Theories made predictions, experiments tested them, reality pushed back. The thing philosophers said could never be touched by science had just been touched. It could be wrong in public. That is what real science looks like, and not everyone could stand it. The same year, more than 100 researchers signed an open letter calling It Pseudoscience. Their charge was sharp. A theory that hands a sliver of consciousness to thermostats and grids, they said, has drifted past what experiment can check. Others fired back just as hard. Wrong is not the same as pseudoscience, they answered. A bold theory that can be tested and bruised is doing exactly what a theory should. You are watching a science argue with itself in real time over the thing closest to you, over the fact of your own awareness. Sit with how strange that is. So here is where it leaves you, and it is not comfortable. You have always believed you were special because you think, because you reason, because you are aware. If this theory is even partly right, that belief is wrong. Thinking is not the source. Awareness is not to your species alone. You are conscious because your information is integrated, because your parts cannot be cut from each other without enormous loss. That is the whole of it. You are not special because you have a soul that a rock lacks. You are special because your Phi is higher than a rock's. That is the entire difference. A number. The same property that lights up your mind flickers faintly in the bee, in the network, maybe in the slow, vast structures of the universe itself. Not as a poem, as a consequence of the math. You are not separate from the rest of nature. You are the most concentrated example of something the rest of nature has a little of. This is the part that costs you something. You wanted to be the exception, the one thing in a dead cosmos that woke up. The theory takes that away. It does not make you less conscious, it makes you less alone, in the worst possible way. The line between you and the things around you stops being a wall. It becomes a dial. And the dial never quite reaches zero. Maybe the theory is wrong. Many serious people think it is. But notice what it took to fight it. Not opinion. Experiments. Predictions. A meter held to a skull. Whatever consciousness turns out to be, it is no longer untouchable. It is on the table now, under the lights, being measured. That 2023 experiment put two theories in the ring. IIT was one. The other was the Global Neuronal Workspace Theory, and that is exactly where this story goes next. If this video made you question what consciousness is, The next one will make you question what your consciousness is, because the workspace theory says consciousness is not what you feel. It is what your brain chooses to broadcast to itself. Everything else happens in the dark, and you never know it was there. Subscribe and hit the bell. You will see that video the moment it drops. This is a trilogy: quantum, mathematical, neuroscientific. 3 answers to one impossible question. You are watching the middle of it now. If this made you think, send it to someone who thinks too much. They will not sleep the same tonight. Then leave me one thing. If IIT is right, the phone in your hand has a phi. Small, but not 0. So where do you draw the line? A fly, a network, a newborn. At what number does a thing become a someone? Tell me in the comments. I read them. So sit for a moment longer. The walls around you have a phi. The chair beneath you has one. And you have the highest we have ever measured. If everything that exists has a number, if consciousness is just integration woven deeply enough, then ask yourself the only question that matters now. What is your number? And what else is sitting in the room with you right now, holding a number of its own? This is Codex Origin. Stay strange.